In a house where everything looked perfect and quiet, a little boy's cry did not sound like a voice. It was a small breath that shook his shoulders and made his eyes shine with fear. 6-year-old Ethan Hartley, who was born deaf, sat on the edge of a velvet stair, holding his blue stuffed whale so tight the button eye pressed into his palm. His father, Robert, was a busy millionaire who filled the Hartley estate with fountains, mirrors, and people who said, "Yes, sir." His new wife, Vanessa, walked the halls in sharp heels that clicked like a metronome. Every room smelled like flowers that did not grow there. Every light was bright enough to show dust that did not exist. Still, nobody really looked at Ethan long enough to notice his hands when they trembled. No one learned how he spoke. No one stayed at his eye level. No one waited to see what he was trying to say. On a rainy afternoon, when thunder rolled, but the kind of thunder only Ethan could feel in his chest like a drum, an 8-year-old girl named Zoe Cruz stepped into the mansion with her mother, Helen, the new housekeeper. Zoe's backpack had a frayed strap and a patch of a smiling sun. She loved puzzles, coins, and quiet animals. At school she sat with a boy who was deaf, and she had learned simple sign language to say hello, to ask, "Are you okay?" and to tell jokes like cookie and shark with her hands. When she saw Ethan on the stairs, shoulders tight, cheeks wet, whale clutched, she did not look away. She knelt, which put her eyes where his eyes were. She signed slowly, "Hi, I'm Zoe." Ethan's crying turned into short, fast breaths. His hands moved like scared birds. He signed one word, small and heavy, "Help." Before Zoe could answer, a voice cut the air like a cold knife. "Zoe, stay close," Vanessa said from the hallway, her smile neat and thin. "Ethan gets overwhelmed." She touched Ethan's head as if he were not a person but a lamp that needed dusting. Ethan flinched. Vanessa's eyes flashed at Zoe for 1 second, then softened like nothing had happened. The house swallowed the moment. And that is where our story begins. A boy who no one heard, a girl who spoke with her hands, and a house that pretended nothing was wrong. If you're watching this now, tell me your city in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? And hit like so more people see this kind of story. Because what came next made the whole estate shake like thunder inside a glass jar. Earlier that morning, Helen had been told the rules. The kitchen must look like no one cooked. The floors must reflect the ceiling. No staff should speak unless asked. Ethan must not run. Ethan must not make a mess. Ethan must sit in lessons with a private tutor who wrote words on a board and never once looked up a single sign. Helen listened with both hands behind her back. She had taken this job because school fees and rent were not free. She had taken this job because the Hartleys paid on time and in full. But when Vanessa said, "We tried to teach him to behave but he doesn't listen," Helen felt a match scratch inside her chest. Ethan did not listen because he could not hear. That was not a problem you fix with being strict. That was a problem you meet halfway, with hands, with patience, with eyes. While Helen cleaned, Zoe sat on a stool by the pantry, swinging her feet, practicing silent words to herself. She shaped friend and safe in the air. She practiced, "I understand." She practiced, "How can I help?" When she caught Ethan watching from the doorway, she smiled with only the corners of her mouth so as not to scare him, then signed again, "Hi, I'm Zoe. Are you okay?" Ethan looked over his shoulder like the walls might answer for him. He lifted his hands and signed, slow and stiff, "I am not safe when she shuts the curtains." He pointed his chin toward the tall windows where heavy drapes hung from rings like dark waves sucked up and frozen. He signed, "She says I am bad when I cry." Zoe's stomach sank like a small stone. She had learned that crying is not bad. Crying is a message like a letter that says, "Please see me." She signed, "Who is she?" Ethan turned his face away and pressed the whale's button eye against his cheek. Zoe wanted to run to Helen. She wanted to whisper, "Mom, something is wrong." But she remembered the way Vanessa's eyes had warned her earlier, like a yellow triangle sign that says, "Don't." So she breathed, slow and steady, and kept signing. She said, "You are not bad. You are brave." Ethan's gaze lifted like a curtain rises. He signed, "No one learns how to talk to me here." He pointed to his chest and then made his fingers talk, then shook his head. "No one," he signed again with both hands heavy. Then his hands moved fast. A story poured out. He showed the sign for night. He showed the sign for dark. He showed the sign for hurt without touching his skin, hands hovering like he was afraid to press on a bruise. He showed the sign for quiet, but his face said scared. When he finished, his hands fell like wet towels. He looked at the floor. For a long second, Zoe could not breathe. Then she did what her teacher had told her once when helping someone who was scared. She made her face calm. She let her shoulders relax. She signed, "Thank you for telling me." She signed, "I believe you." She signed, "I will help." Ethan's mouth opened a little like he'd forgotten how to do that. His eyes filled again, but this time the tears were not loud. They were soft like rain that means the heat will break. Zoe looked around for paper and found a small whiteboard tucked under a stack of cookbooks. She wrote with a dry erase marker in big letters, "I can sign. I will tell my MO. You are safe with me." She held it up. Ethan took 2 steps closer, close enough to touch the board with the tip of his finger. He did not smile, but his shoulders dropped half an inch, and that was something. When Vanessa called for Ethan's lesson, the tutor arrived with neat hair and a neat tie and a neat book about words Ethan could not hear and could barely see from the far table. He tapped the book like a drum to get Ethan's attention, then wrote "Apple" in large letters on a card. Ethan stared at the card with a blank face that adults sometimes mistake for not caring. It was not that. He was thinking how apple can be more than a word. It is shape and color and taste and the feel of biting. It is also a hand shape at the cheek in sign language, which he loved because it felt like eating without the crunch. When Ethan looked up at the tutor, his fingers moved a little, trying to show the sign. The tutor did not know it. He only tapped the card again. Vanessa stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Focus, Ethan," she said, and he could not hear her words, but he saw her mouth make the tight shape that meant trouble. The lesson went on like a slow car stuck in the wrong gear. Ethan drifted. The tutor sighed. Vanessa checked the clock. When it ended, Ethan slid off the chair and walked away fast, whale under his arm, face carefully blank. In the hallway, he passed a mirror and stopped to watch himself. He lifted his hands and signed to the boy in the glass, "You are not broken." Then he signed, "Hold on." He took one breath and wanted to believe it. Zoe waited until the tutor left. She stepped from the pantry, glanced at her mother, and saw Helen's eyes asking a question. Zoe made a tiny sign with her thumb to chin, "Mother," then signed under her chin, "Later." Helen nodded once. Later came sooner than either of them expected. In the kitchen, while Helen scrubbed spotless counters, a crash echoed from the hallway, the kind that is not plates or cups but something softer and worse. Zoe dropped the dish towel and ran. Ethan was on the floor by the curtains, wail a few feet away, one of the heavy fabric panels half torn from its rings. He had tried to open them to see the rain. Vanessa stood above him, face white with anger, one hand still lifted where she had yanked the cord too hard. "Look what you've done," she said, and even if Ethan could not hear, he could see her mouth in the shape of blame. He pulled his knees in, made himself small. Zoe skidded to a stop. She signed big so Ethan could see from the floor, "Not your fault." She took 2 steps and put herself between him and Vanessa without thinking, like a guard. "He wanted to see the storm," she said aloud, voice shaking. "He is scared. He needs someone to sign to him." The room froze. Vanessa blinked. Zoe felt her mother at her back now, warm and steady. "Mrs. Hartley," Helen said, voice calm but solid, "my daughter knows basic sign language. Ethan can tell us what he needs." Vanessa's smile came back too fast. "That's cute," she said. "But he needs discipline, not hand games." Ethan's breathing sped up. He slapped his palms over his ears out of habit even though it did nothing. He watched Vanessa's mouth and the shapes were sharp. Something old and tired in him cracked again. He signed, reaching toward Zoe, "Please don't leave." Zoe signed, "I won't." Robert Hartley chose that minute to come home. He was tall, tired, and always on a phone call about something that sounded important but never as important as the people in his house. He saw the torn curtain, the boy on the floor, the girl with her hands in the air making shapes he did not understand, and his wife with a smile like glass. "What happened?" he asked. Vanessa answered first, smooth as butter on a hot pan. "He had another tantrum," she said. "I was handling it." Robert looked at Ethan, then at Zoe, then at Helen. He rubbed his forehead like a man who has a headache that has lived inside him for months. "Ethan," he said, stepping closer, "Buddy, you've got to behave." Ethan watched his father's mouth. He caught Ethan. He caught behave. He did not catch love. He did not catch "I see you." He made his hands still and stared at the floor. Zoe wanted to scream and could not. Instead, she made her fingers talk. She signed big and clear, "He is crying because he is not safe." Robert blinked. "What is she doing?" he asked. Vanessa laughed a small laugh. "She thinks the boy is going to tell us a story with his hands." Helen took a breath. "Sir," she said to Robert, "your son is deaf. He needs us to learn how he speaks. Zoe can ask him what he needs." Robert looked at his son as if seeing him through a window he had never opened. He sat on the floor beside Ethan and tried to look at him at the boy's height. "Son," he said slowly, "are you okay?" The words floated like bubbles that popped before they reached Ethan's mind. Ethan looked at Zoe, not his father. He trusted the hands more than the mouth. Zoe knelt again and signed, "Do you want to tell your dad?" Ethan signed, "Yes, but I am scared." Zoe signed, "You are brave. I am here." Then she signed the question that hurt to ask, "Has someone been unkind?" Ethan's hands rose and fell, like he was pulling words from a deep lake. He signed, "Curtains mean I cannot see anybody see me. She makes it dark and says I am a problem and I deserve quiet because I am too much. She squeezes my arm when she is angry. She tells me to stop crying or I will make Dad hate me." He did not poke his skin or show marks. He did not need to. His eyes told the story with more truth than any bruise. Zoe repeated the signs slowly so Helen could say them aloud to Robert. The kitchen clock ticked. Rain tapped the glass like fingertips. With each word, Robert's face changed, softening and breaking and hardening again in small pieces. "No," Vanessa said, stepping forward. No. He is confused. He is making things up because he wants attention. He can't even hear what you're saying." She reached for his wrist. Ethan jerked back so fast he fell. The whale bumped his knee. Zoe moved closer and lifted her hand like a stop sign. "Don't," she said. Vanessa's eyes were bright and flat in a way that made Zoe's skin feel cold. Robert stood up slow, as if tired bones suddenly felt heavy. "Vanessa," he said, and Zoe could not read his face. "We'll sort this out. Let's all calm down." He looked at Helen. "Can you take Ethan and—" He stopped because he did not know the right word. Comfort him? Translate him? Fix him? The language of his own son felt like a locked door. He swallowed and said, "Can you help him feel safe for a minute?" Helen nodded. Zoe held out her hands to Ethan. He put his small fingers in hers like two puzzle pieces that had been carved to fit. They sat together on the floor by the whale. Ethan signed, "Thank you." Zoe signed, "Always." Robert put a hand over his mouth. Something like shame moved behind his eyes, the kind that turns a father into a student. For the first time, he wondered what kind of home he had built if a child had to ask a stranger for safety inside it. Vanessa watched this new shape forming in his thoughts and stepped close, touching his sleeve. "Honey," she said sweetly, "you know how he is. He gets dramatic. Maybe this little girl is confused. You said yourself we needed the curtains because the sun overheats the room. You told me to be firm." Robert frowned. He did not remember saying be firm like this. He remembered saying be patient, be kind, and then forgetting to check whether those words ever lived in these rooms. That evening, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Helen set a plate of cut fruit on the coffee table, things Ethan liked, bananas and tiny coins, apples and thin moons, and strawberries that looked like bright hearts. She wrote 2 words on a sticky note, "Your choice." Zoe drew quick pictures next to the words, an apple and a strawberry, because pictures are also a language. Ethan touched the picture of the apple and then made the sign for it at his cheek, and Zoe did it too, and they both smiled for the first time in the same second. Robert stood near the doorway watching, learning that the boy he loved had a way of speaking he had never tried to hear. Vanessa paced with her phone. Every time Zoe and Ethan signed, Vanessa's jaw worked like she was chewing on a thought she could not swallow. When she passed the curtain, she stopped, tugged the fabric once, and then let it drop, a small private test that sent a shiver over Ethan's skin. Zoe caught the shiver. She made the sign for "with" and "me," then patted the carpet right beside her. Ethan scooted until his hip touched her knee, and only then did his shoulders relax. "He's getting spoiled," Vanessa said under her breath, but loud enough for Robert to hear. He should not need a child to babysit him. Robert did not answer. He was counting Ethan's breaths. Close to bedtime, Zoe asked if Ethan had any toys he liked besides the whale. He pointed at a wooden box on a shelf. Inside were small cars and a rubber ball. He took the blue car and pushed it in slow circles on the carpet, eyes soft. Zoe tapped the carpet twice and signed, "Can I see your room?" Ethan hesitated. He signed, "It is tidy. Too tidy." He signed, "She doesn't let me keep drawings up." He signed, "My window is big but the curtains stay closed when she is in a bad mood." Zoe looked at Helen. Helen's face said yes with a tiny nod. The 3 of them walked down the hall. Ethan's room was blue and white like a magazine picture. A limited number of toys sat on a shelf like they were being judged. The whale had a neat spot on the pillow like it had to pass a test to stay. On the desk, a small pile of paper clips held nothing. There were no crayon marks. There were no messy corners that proved a child lived there. Zoe's chest felt tight. She signed, "You can make mess in my house sometimes." "It's okay." Ethan smiled, small real. He took 2 steps toward the window then stopped. He signed, "Not when she is here." Zoe would have asked more, but the hallway light shifted. Shadows moved under the door. Ethan's hands shook. He signed fast, "She comes at night sometimes to check. She says I need to learn to be quiet. She says Dad doesn't like noise." Zoe swallowed. She signed, "I hear you. I will tell my mom. We will tell your dad." Ethan shook his head so hard his hair swished. He signed, "She will say I lie." He signed, "She will close the curtains and make the room dark and stand close so I can only see her mouth. She says if I cry, I lose my whale." He grabbed the whale and hugged it like a life jacket. Zoe's eyes stung. She wanted to be brave like the heroes in the shows she loved. She wanted to shine like a flashlight. Helen stepped out to speak to Robert in the hall. Zoe stayed with Ethan and thought hard. She remembered that her teacher had once said, "When someone cannot hear, we must become very clear." Zoe pulled out her old tablet from her backpack. The screen had a crack on one corner but still woke up. She opened the drawing app and wrote in simple words, "If I ask you yes/no questions, can you answer?" Ethan nodded. She wrote, "Do the curtains mean someone wants you quiet?" Ethan nodded again, tears jumping to his lashes but not falling. She wrote, "Does Vanessa make you scared?" Ethan nodded so slowly it was like a bough of a tree in no wind. She wrote, "Did anyone else know?" Ethan paused, then shook his head. Zoe wrote, "Do you want me to tell your dad now?" Ethan looked at the door, then at the floor, then at the whale, then at Zoe. He lifted his hands and signed, "Yes. But careful." Zoe did not know how to be careful without being loud, but she was willing to learn. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. She stood up, tablet shaking a little. The next minutes felt like walking across a thin bridge. Helen came back in with Robert. He looked different now, not just a man in a suit, but a father who had put on a new pair of ears made of attention. "Ethan," he said, and then he stopped talking because he remembered that talking without hands did not reach his son. He looked at Zoe and said, "Can you help me ask?" Zoe nodded. She opened the tablet again and wrote, "Dad wants to know, are you safe when Vanessa is here?" Ethan read. He took a breath like he was about to jump into a pool. He signed, big enough for Robert to see, "No." Robert's face broke, then set. Zoe wrote, "Do the curtains mean she will be mean?" Ethan signed, "Yes." Zoe wrote, "Did she hurt you?" Ethan's hands hovered. He signed, careful but honest, "Not always hitting. Sometimes squeezing. Mostly words. She says I am a problem. She says if I cry I make Dad hate me." Robert's hand went to his mouth. He was not a man who cried at work. He was a man who cried in private if he cried at all. But now his eyes filled up right there, in a blue room that did not look like a child's room, in front of a child who had been alone. He signed something clumsy that looked like "sorry" mixed with love, and it did not look right, but it was the first time he had tried to put love on his hands and Ethan saw the trying. Ethan blinked hard. He signed, "I want you to learn." Robert nodded fast like a promise. A sound came from the doorway, a soft click like a light switch. The room cooled. Everyone turned. Vanessa stood there, half in shadow, half in light, her hand still on the switch. The curtains shivered as if a draft had crept in. Her smile was the kind that does not reach the eyes. "What a sweet meeting," she said. "Are we having a little party?" Zoe stepped closer to Ethan until their shoulders touched. Helen moved between Vanessa and the bed without making it look like a shield, but it was. Robert took one step forward. "We're talking as a family," he said. Vanessa laughed, and the laugh did not sound like a laugh. It sounded like a door closing. "A family?" she said. "Since when do we take lessons from the help's child?" Zoe's cheeks got hot. She looked at Ethan, whose fingers pressed into the whale so deep they left dents. Vanessa took one smooth step toward the window and pinched the edge of the curtain. "Time for bed," she said, soft and firm, like every bedtime in this house had sounded for months. Ethan's breath came too fast. His eyes flicked to Zoe's hands like they were the only lights in the room. Zoe lifted her fingers. She signed, slow and clear, "I am here. You are brave. You are safe." Vanessa's fingers tightened on the fabric. Robert's jaw set. Helen's hand hovered in the air like she was about to catch something falling. The room held its breath so hard it almost turned blue. And then, before anyone could stop her, Vanessa tugged the curtain. The fabric thundered across the rod. Shadows spilled into the room like a thick wave. Ethan flinched so hard the whale fell. Zoe grabbed his hand. Robert stepped fast, knocking into the nightstand, a lamp wobbling. Helen said Robert's name once like an anchor thrown quick. The room felt small and dangerous, and Ethan's eyes went wide and wet, and in that exact second, Zoe did the one thing no one in this house had thought to do. She raised her hands into the thin stream of light that still leaked from the hallway and signed with her whole body, huge and sure so Ethan could see every letter of the truth. You are not a problem. You are loved. We can tell. Ethan's breath hitched, and he began to sign back, fast like a dam breaking. But before his hands could finish the most important word, the doorknob behind Vanessa turned again from the outside, slow, deliberate, like someone else. Someone who had seen everything, was about to walk in and change the rules of this house forever. The room froze as Vanessa's fingers clutched the heavy curtain and dragged it across the rod with that long, tearing sound, swallowing the last of the evening light. The darkness she pulled into Ethan's room was not just shadows. It was the same silence she had wrapped around him for months, the silence that hurt more than words. Ethan shrank into himself, trembling, his hands twitching like trapped birds. He wanted to sign, but fear held them stiff. He reached blindly for his stuffed whale, but it had rolled under the bed. Zoe held his small hand, her heart racing so loud she thought everyone must hear it, though Ethan could not. Her fingers lifted instinctively, her body leaning forward as if her hands could shield him from what was coming. She signed slowly, firmly, "You are not alone." Ethan's wide eyes locked on her fingers, clinging to them like a rope in the dark. His breathing slowed, but his tears still burned trails down his cheeks. Robert stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the floor, his face caught between doubt and awakening. He saw his son's fear clearer than ever, but years of silence and excuses tangled in his chest. He wanted to speak, to shout, to protect, but Vanessa's voice cut through first, sharp and dripping with sugar. "Robert," she said smoothly, her hand still on the curtain cord, "this is ridiculous. He's a child, children cry. This little girl is making it worse by filling his head with nonsense. You know Ethan exaggerates. He's always been sensitive." Her smile was controlled, but her eyes darted toward Zoe with something colder. Helen shifted closer, placing herself between her daughter and Vanessa, her hands gripping the side of the bed frame so tightly her knuckles blanched. Zoe, trembling but defiant, signed again with her free hand, "Safe. With me." Ethan's small fingers finally lifted, shaky but determined. He signed back, "Don't let her take me." His lip quivered, but his eyes carried a spark that hadn't been there before. Zoe bit her lip and whispered aloud so Robert would hear, "He says he's not safe with her. He says don't let her take him." Robert froze. The words hit like bricks. He turned toward his wife slowly, his face unreadable. Vanessa's painted smile cracked for just a second, then reformed, practiced. "Robert, really? You're going to take the word of a child?" She flicked her chin at Zoe. "And a boy who doesn't even understand what he's saying?" "He understands enough," Helen said quietly but firmly, her voice shaking with contained fury. For the first time, Robert noticed how tightly Ethan's hand clung to Zoe's. He noticed how the boy didn't flinch from the little girl but recoiled from Vanessa's every step. His chest ached with a guilt he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. But just as he opened his mouth, Vanessa let go of the curtain and marched forward. She bent low, her hand reaching fast for Ethan's arm, fingers sharp with control. "Come on, Ethan. Enough of this." "No," Zoe shouted, surprising herself with the force of it. Her arms wrapped around Ethan, shielding him. Her small body trembled, but she didn't move. Robert grabbed Vanessa's wrist mid-air. The sound of skin meeting skin was soft, but the room thundered with the weight of it. Vanessa's eyes widened, shocked. Robert's grip was not violent, but firm enough to stop her. His voice was low, dangerous. "Don't touch him." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Ethan's wide eyes darted between his father, Zoe, and Vanessa. His tiny hands lifted, trembling, forming shaky words. "Dad, protect me." Zoe gasped, tears spilling over. She quickly echoed the signs, whispering, "He's asking you to protect him." Robert's world tilted. Those 3 words, simple, clear, stabbed into the hollow he hadn't realized was in his chest. He looked at his son, really looked for the first time in months. Ethan's lips trembled, his body shaking, but his eyes pleaded with a raw truth no lie could mimic. Robert released Vanessa's wrist and turned fully toward his son. "I will," he whispered, voice breaking. "I will protect you." Vanessa staggered back, her mask slipping for the first time. Fury flashed in her eyes, cold and dangerous. "You're making a mistake, Robert. He's manipulating you. He doesn't know what he's saying." But Robert cut her off, louder than he'd ever been inside this house. He knows enough. And if you think I'm blind to what's been happening under my own roof? He stopped, his chest heaving, words caught between anger and shame. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. His small hands twitched, unsure whether to keep speaking. Zoe touched his shoulder gently, nodding at him. "Tell him," she signed. "This is your moment." And slowly, haltingly, Ethan signed. "She closes curtains. She makes it dark. She says I am bad. She says you don't love me if I cry. She squeezes my arm. She scares me." His signs were shaky but desperate and clear. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Zoe repeated the signs aloud for Robert, her voice cracking. Helen stood silently, her own tears brimming, watching Robert's face crumble. Robert's shoulders sagged as if the weight of 10 years had fallen on him at once. He knelt down eye level with Ethan, something he hadn't done in so long. His hands lifted awkwardly, clumsy, but he tried. He signed one word, slow and imperfect: "Sorry." His mouth moved too. "I'm so sorry." Ethan blinked, stunned. His lips quivered, but then he signed back, fast, desperate: "Learn. Please. Stay." Robert's throat closed. He nodded, choking on words he couldn't say, tears finally spilling from his eyes. He wrapped his arms gently around his son, careful, trembling. Ethan stiffened at first, and used to the warmth, then slowly melted into it, burying his face against his father's shoulder. His small hands clutched Robert's shirt as if to anchor him there. The room was silent except for Ethan's muffled sobs and Robert's shaking breaths. Zoe leaned back, wiping her eyes. Helen covered her mouth, whispering a prayer under her breath. Vanessa's face twisted. Her eyes burned with fury she could no longer hide. "So this is how it is?" she hissed. "You'll believe him over me? A spoiled brat and a servant's child over your wife." Robert stood, still holding Ethan, and turned toward her. His voice was steady, filled with something steel-hard. "If protecting my son means choosing, then yes. I choose him." Vanessa's jaw dropped, her carefully constructed mask shattering. For the first time, she looked less like a queen of the house and more like someone cornered. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and she glanced at the door as if planning an exit. But before anyone could move, Ethan squirmed in Robert's arms. His small hand pointed toward Vanessa. He signed, "She will lie. Don't let her." Zoe quickly translated aloud. Robert tightened his grip on Ethan, his voice low. "No one is lying for you anymore, Vanessa." Her face flushed red. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A maid peeked nervously around the corner, eyes wide. Behind her, the estate manager approached cautiously. They had heard the shouting. The house, so used to silence, was finally awake. Vanessa's eyes darted between them, panic flickering for a split second before she smoothed her expression. "Robert," she said softly now, her tone shifting back to sweetness, "please, let's not do this in front of the staff. Let's talk privately." But Robert cut her off again. "No more secrets. No more shadows. No more curtains." He looked down at Ethan, then back at Zoe. His voice cracked as he said, "The truth stays in the light." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glittering with something dangerous. But before she could answer, Ethan suddenly signed something frantic, fast, his little hands a blur. His face was pale with terror. Zoe leaned in, catching his hands. Her own eyes widened as she read the signs. "He says she heard him last night. Worse. He says he thought no one would ever know. He says he doesn't want to go to sleep tonight." The words hung in the air like broken glass. Helen gasped, clutching her chest. Robert froze, his heart pounding. Ethan's hands shook violently, his body trembling against his father's arms. Robert turned slowly toward Vanessa. His eyes were darker than Zoe had ever seen. "What did you do?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. Vanessa's painted smile wavered, her breathing sharp. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The silence was louder than any answer. And in that silence, Ethan's sobs grew louder, his small voice breaking through for the first time in months. A sound that was not words, not signs, but raw, aching truth. The house trembled with it. And everyone knew nothing would ever be the same again. But just as Robert took a step toward Vanessa, ready to demand answers, the estate manager cleared his throat nervously. "Sir," he said quietly, "there is someone at the door. They say it's urgent." Robert's brows furrowed, but before he could respond, Ethan shook his head violently, his hands flashing in panic. "Don't let her go. Don't leave me with her." Zoe caught the signs and translated in a rush, her voice trembling. "He's saying don't let her leave. Robert looked from Ethan to Vanessa, whose lips curled into a sly smile despite the storm around her. "You see," she said sweetly, "the boy is paranoid. He doesn't even want you to answer your own door." But in her eyes there was something else, something like fear. And as Robert hesitated, torn between his son's plea and the waiting figure at the door, a single thought pierced the air. Whatever was waiting outside was about to unravel even more than what had already been exposed. The truth was only just beginning. The knock at the front door echoed through the vast halls of the Hartley estate like the toll of a bell, low and unsettling. It was late enough that visitors made no sense. The house staff shifted nervously, whispering to one another in corners. Ethan clutched his father's shirt tighter, his little body trembling like a branch in a storm. His hands jerked, trying to sign something fast, desperate. Zoe leaned close, her eyes wide, reading every flick of his trembling fingers. "He says don't open it. He says whoever's out there, Vanessa is scared of them." Her voice cracked, carrying the weight of his fear. Robert froze, torn between his son's plea and the unknown figure waiting outside. He looked at Vanessa, and for the first time that night, her composure slipped completely. Her face blanched, her breathing sharp and shallow. She pressed her palm against her pearl necklace, eyes darting toward the front hall like a cornered animal. "Don't answer it," she said quickly, her voice too high, too urgent. "It's probably nothing. A mistake. We don't need strangers at this hour." Her sudden panic betrayed something deeper, something festering under the polished surface she wore like armor. Helen, standing protectively near Zoe, narrowed her eyes. "Mrs. Hartley," she said cautiously, "why are you so afraid of a knock on your own door?" Vanessa snapped back, her tone brittle, "Because I don't want this house disturbed any more than it already has been." But her gaze betrayed her words. She wasn't worried about the household, she was worried about herself. Zoe caught Ethan's hands again, asking silently, "Do you know who it is?" Ethan's lips trembled. He signed, "I don't know. But she does. She's scared." Robert adjusted his grip on Ethan, forcing his own heartbeat to steady. "Stay here," he said, his tone directed at Helen and Zoe. Then he glanced at Vanessa, whose face had grown paler by the second. "And you don't move." With that, he turned and strode toward the grand front entrance, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. Ethan whimpered, reaching after him, but Zoe held his hand, whispering softly, "He'll be okay. He's strong." Still, her own heart thudded against her ribs. The knock came again, louder, more insistent this time. Robert pulled the heavy door open, and on the doorstep stood a woman in her early 40s, her black coat damp from the rain, her hair clinging to her cheeks. In her hand, she held a brown leather folder swollen with papers. Her eyes, sharp, searching, landed on Robert first, then darted past him into the house as if she already knew what she would find. "Mr. Hartley?" she asked, her voice low, professional, but carrying urgency. "I'm Detective Harris, Family Services Division. We received a report about your son." Robert stiffened, his body freezing for half a second. Behind him the air shifted. Vanessa's sharp intake of breath sliced through the hall like a blade. Zoe felt Ethan jolt, his eyes wide, his little hand signing frantic words. She called someone. Or someone called about her. Zoe quickly whispered the translation to Helen, who tightened her grip on her daughter's shoulder. Robert's face was pale, his voice careful. "My son?" he asked, though the weight in his tone carried dread more than confusion. Detective Harris nodded, her eyes flicking to her folder. "Yes, sir." A concern was raised regarding possible neglect and mistreatment in this household. "I need to see your son." The silence that followed was so heavy even the rain outside seemed to pause. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply as she hurried forward, her smile stretched too wide. "Detective, this must be some mistake," she said, her tone honeyed but cracking underneath. "Ethan is a delicate boy. He's difficult, yes, but loved. Deeply loved. Whoever reported us clearly misunderstood." But Robert raised his hand, cutting her off. His voice was steel. "He's here." He turned slightly and gestured toward the living room, where Ethan sat clinging to Zoe, his small hands pressed together in fear. The detective stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. The torn curtain, the flushed faces, Ethan's trembling body pressed against Zoe like a lifeline. Her gaze lingered on the boy, softening just enough to melt the professional mask for a second. She crouched down, lowering herself to Ethan's level. "Hi there, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice calm, slow. "My name is Detective Harris. I'm here to make sure you're okay." Ethan blinked, confused. He couldn't hear her words, but he watched her lips, his brows knitting. Zoe tapped his shoulder lightly. She wants to know if you're okay, she signed. Ethan's hands lifted, hesitant, shaking. He signed, not safe when she closes the curtains. She scares me. Zoe swallowed hard, then translated aloud, her voice breaking. He says he's not safe when the curtains close. He says she scares him. Detective Harris's eyes darkened. She looked at Robert, then at Vanessa, who was already stepping forward, protesting. This is outrageous. He's a child, he imagines things But Harris raised her hand firmly. Mrs. Hartley, I'll speak with you in a moment. Right now, I want to hear from him. She nodded at Zoe. Can you keep helping me translate? Zoe nodded quickly, her hands tightening around Ethan's. The detective leaned closer to Ethan, her tone soft. Ethan, can you tell me, has anyone hurt you? Zoe signed the question, her small fingers careful, deliberate. Ethan's face crumpled, his lips trembling. His hands shook as he signed, yes. She squeezes my arm. She says I'm bad. She says Dad won't love me if I cry. Zoe's voice cracked as she repeated the signs, tears spilling down her cheeks. Robert's entire body stiffened, his jaw clenching, his fists trembling at his sides. His gaze locked on Vanessa, whose face had gone pale, her lips curling in a tight, desperate smile. That's not true, she hissed, her voice sharp now. He's confused, he's just repeating what that little girl has been feeding him. She pointed at Zoe, her finger trembling with fury. Helen stepped forward instantly, placing herself in front of Zoe. Her voice was firm, steady, protective. Don't you dare blame my child for your cruelty. The room pulsed with tension, every breath tight, every glance sharp. Detective Harris closed her folder slowly, her eyes never leaving Vanessa's face. Mrs. Hartley, I'll need to speak with you privately. But for now, Ethan will stay with me. No. Vanessa shouted, panic breaking through her mask. You can't take him. He belongs here. She lunged forward, but Robert blocked her, his hand outstretched like a wall. Enough, he thundered, his voice echoing through the mansion. You've done enough. Ethan whimpered, his small hands signing frantically, don't let her take me. Please, Dad. Zoe translated in a rush, her voice desperate. Robert turned immediately, kneeling, his hands gripping Ethan's shoulders gently. I won't, son. I won't let her near you again. His eyes burned into Vanessa's, the truth clear at last. But Vanessa's fury only grew. Her hands shook, her chest rising and falling fast. You're making a mistake, Robert, she spat. You'll ruin everything. Without me, this house will fall apart. You need me. Robert's voice was calm, cold. No. What I need is to protect my son. What I need is the truth. The detective stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mrs. Hartley, I'll need you to come with me. We'll talk at the station. Vanessa's face twisted, her eyes wild. For a terrifying moment, Zoe thought she might lash out again, might grab Ethan in a final desperate act. Ethan's body stiffened, his hands shaking, signing wildly, she's going to hurt me again. Stop her. Zoe's translation rang out like an alarm. Robert stepped in front of his son, shielding him completely. Not anymore, he said firmly. His voice carried finality, strength, the weight of a father who had finally chosen. Detective Harris gestured, and another officer stepped inside from the rain, his hand resting near his holster. Vanessa froze, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between the officer, Robert, and the trembling boy clutching his wail. For the first time she looked powerless. But as the officer stepped closer, ready to escort her out, Vanessa's lips curled into a chilling smile. Her voice was low, venomous. You think you've won, Robert? But secrets don't stay buried forever. And when the truth about this family comes out, you'll wish you'd stayed blind. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Robert's face hardened, but in his chest, doubt flickered like a spark in dry wood. What did she mean? What truth? Ethan whimpered again, burying his face into Robert's shirt, his little hands signing one last desperate plea. Don't let her come back. Don't let her. Robert held him tighter, whispering, she won't. I promise. But as Vanessa was led out of the house, her laughter, low, cold, and bitter, echoed down the hall. And everyone in that room knew, this was not the end. This was only the beginning. The mansion had cracked open, its shadows spilling secrets. And the worst truth had yet to be revealed. The rain outside grew heavier, hammering the roof of the Hartley estate until the entire mansion seemed to shiver under the weight of the storm. The grand door closed with a deep thud as Detective Harris's team led Vanessa away, her cold laughter still echoing down the marble halls like a haunting echo that refused to die. Her words, secrets don't stay buried forever, clung to Robert's mind like a shadow he could not shake. He stood in the entryway, one arm wrapped protectively around Ethan, who clung to him as if afraid that letting go would mean losing safety all over again. Zoe and Helen stood close, silent but watchful, their eyes fixed on the father and son as if anchoring them in the moment. For the first time in years, Robert truly looked at his son. Not at his silence, not at the neat rows of tutors or the rules written in polished reports, but at the boy himself, fragile, trembling, desperate to be seen. And yet, even in Ethan's fear, Robert saw a new light in his eyes, a spark that had appeared only when Zoe's hands began to move, when someone finally bothered to understand. The realization weighed on him like iron. He had let years slip by without learning the one language his son needed most. He had let Vanessa's voice dominate the house until Ethan's own voice, his hands, were swallowed. "Dad," Zoe whispered, pulling Robert from his thoughts. She nodded toward Ethan, who was tugging at his sleeve, small fingers lifting with urgency. Robert crouched so they were eye to eye, his knees stiff from years of boardrooms and long hours but bending anyway. Ethan's hands moved quickly. "Is she gone? Will she come back?" His lip trembled as he signed, his wail crushed in the crook of his elbow. Zoe translated softly, though Robert had already guessed. Robert shook his head, his voice firm even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. "She won't hurt you again. I promise." He turned to Detective Harris, who was closing her folder, her sharp eyes still studying the boy. "She's being taken to the station, correct?" The detective nodded. "For questioning. Given what I've heard tonight, we'll be opening a full investigation." "But Mr. Hartley," she hesitated, her gaze flicking to Ethan and then back to Robert. "Children don't usually make these things up. If what your son said is true, then there may be more." She mentioned secrets. "Be prepared for this to go deeper than you expect." Robert's throat tightened. More? What else could there be beyond the abuse Ethan had just confessed? He swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just protect him." "I intend to," Harris said firmly, then gave Ethan one last reassuring smile before heading out into the storm. The door shut behind her, leaving the family in a silence broken only by the distant sound of Vanessa's car being driven away. Ethan sagged against his father's chest, exhausted. His small hands made one last sign, tired, before his eyes fluttered shut. Robert carried him gently upstairs, past the immaculate halls that suddenly felt like stage sets, empty and false. Zoe followed closely, unwilling to leave Ethan's side. Helen walked behind, her eyes scanning every corner of the mansion as though danger still lurked in its polished shadows. Robert laid Ethan carefully in his bed, pulling the blanket up to his chin. The boy stirred, gripping his wail tighter, then settled into a restless sleep. Robert stood at the edge of the bed, staring down at him, guilt swirling like a storm inside his chest. Zoe slipped into the chair beside the bed, watching Ethan's small face, her hands resting lightly on the blanket near his. "He'll be okay," she whispered, though her voice carried more hope than certainty. Robert turned to her, his expression heavy. "How did you learn? The signs, I mean." Zoe shrugged softly. "At school. There's a boy in my class who's deaf. The teacher showed us a few words. I wanted to learn more. I thought it was like having a secret code with your hands." She looked down at Ethan and smiled faintly. "But it's not a secret. It's his whole voice. And nobody here was listening." The words pierced Robert deeper than she could know. He swallowed hard, his jaw tight. "I should have learned," he admitted, his voice low. "All this time. I let others tell me he was fine, that he'd adjust, that tutors and discipline were enough. But I never tried to understand him myself." Helen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You can't change the past, sir. But you can decide what kind of father you'll be from this moment forward." Robert nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling into his bones. He reached down, brushing Ethan's hair back gently from his forehead. "Then from this moment forward, I'll be the father he deserves." For a brief, fragile moment, hope flickered in the room. The storm outside still raged, but inside, something warmer began to grow. Zoe sat by Ethan's bed until her own eyes grew heavy. Helen guided her daughter gently out of the room, leaving Robert alone with his son. The millionaire sat in the chair beside the bed, hands clasped, watching the boy breathe. 4 years, he had measured his life in profit margins and investments, believing money could build walls strong enough to protect his family. But no amount of wealth had stopped Ethan's tears. No business deal could have translated his son's silence. And now, sitting in the dim light of the room, Robert realized the mansion had been built on sand. As the night deepened, Robert drifted into uneasy sleep. He dreamt of Vanessa's laughter echoing through the halls, of curtains closing, of Ethan's hands desperately signing words he couldn't understand. He woke with a start to find Ethan stirring, his eyes wide, his body tense. "Ethan?" Robert whispered, leaning forward. Ethan's hands shot up, frantic. "Bad dream. She came back. Took Whale. Said you hate me." Tears streamed down his cheeks as he signed, his small body shaking. Robert's chest ached. He caught the boy's trembling hands in his own. "She's gone. I don't hate you. I love you. You're my son. My only son." The words came out raw, almost broken, but true. Ethan blinked, searching his father's face, and though he couldn't hear the words, he seemed to feel their weight. Slowly his breathing calmed. He hugged his Whale tight, eyes still wet but calmer now. Robert kissed the top of his head. "I'll learn, Ethan. I'll learn your language. I'll never let you feel alone again." But even as he made the promise, Vanessa's last words returned to haunt him. Secrets don't stay buried forever. What secrets could she have meant? He thought back to the years since his first wife's death, to the sudden way Vanessa had come into his life, charming and smooth, filling the house with rules and silence. Had he been blind to more than just his son's pain? The thought gnawed at him, dark and unsettling. Downstairs, Helen sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea to calm her nerves. Zoe leaned against her, half asleep. The house felt different now, raw and uncertain, like a wound newly opened. Helen's eyes flicked toward the windows, watching the storm rage on, her thoughts heavy. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. "I can feel it." She was right. Because even as Vanessa sat in the back of a police car, her hands cuffed, her lips curved into that same bitter smile. She leaned forward, whispering to herself, a promise only the rain could hear. "You think you've won, Robert? But the truth will ruin you more than me. And when it comes out, that boy won't just cry. He'll hate you." Her laughter was drowned by the storm, but its echo carried like a curse. Back in Ethan's room, Robert tucked his son closer, vowing silently that no matter what truth Vanessa thought she held, he would not let it tear his family apart again. But deep in his chest, unease grew like a slow fire. Because somewhere in Vanessa's words, there was not just malice, there was certainty. Certainty that something buried in the Hartley family's past, something Robert himself might not even know, was about to come crashing into the light. And when it did, everything, Ethan's fragile safety, Robert's new resolve, even Zoe's brave friendship, would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The storm outside raged on, and inside the mansion, the night stretched long, filled with restless dreams and heavy promises. When dawn finally came, it did not bring peace. It brought the first crack of a deeper storm that had nothing to do with rain. And in the silence of that morning, as sunlight fought through the torn curtains, Ethan sat up in bed, his Whale pressed to his chest, and signed one word to Zoe, who had tiptoed back in to check on him. The word was simple, but it chilled her. Danger. The first light of morning crept through the torn curtains in Ethan's room, painting the blue walls with streaks of gold. For a moment, the mansion felt peaceful, as though the storm from the night before had washed everything clean. But inside, no one felt peace. Robert sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, staring at his son who still clutched the worn blue Whale against his chest. Zoe had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her small hand resting near Ethan's blanket as if she had guarded him through the night. Helen lingered at the door, her face lined with worry that no rest could erase. Robert's mind replayed Vanessa's last words on a loop. "Secrets don't stay buried forever. The truth will ruin you." He tried to dismiss it as the venom of a woman desperate to escape blame, but her tone had been too certain, too sharp. She had said it like someone holding a knife hidden under the table, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan stirred awake, blinking against the morning light. He turned his head, his eyes landing on Robert, then Zoe, then Helen. His small hands lifted weakly. "Is she gone?" Robert nodded firmly, his voice steady. "Yes, she's gone." Zoe quickly signed the same words so Ethan could see them. Relief softened his small face, but only for a moment. His hands trembled as he signed again. "Not safe yet. She has more." The boy's words twisted Robert's stomach. He leaned closer. "What do you mean, son?" Ethan shook his head, pressing the Whale to his chest. His lips moved without sound, but Zoe leaned in and read his hands. "He says," she told him once in the dark, that she knew something about his mom. His real mom. Robert froze. For a moment he thought he had misread the signs, misheard Zoe's words. "What did you say?" he whispered. Zoe repeated it, slower this time, her fingers trembling as she signed for Ethan to confirm. Ethan nodded quickly, his face pale. His small hands moved again. She said, "If I cry, Dad will find out what Mom really did. That he won't love me anymore." Robert's chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Memories of his late wife, gentle smiles, soft laughter, the way she had held Ethan as a baby, flashed before his eyes. She had died suddenly when Ethan was only 3. He had mourned her with all the weight of his heart. What could Vanessa possibly know about her? Helen stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Sir, children don't invent lies like this." If she said it, she meant to use it. Robert rubbed his face with both hands, his thoughts spinning. Vanessa had not only hurt Ethan physically, she had poisoned him with fear about the one memory that was supposed to remain pure. His mother. And now, those words were lodged in Robert's mind like shards of glass. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang again. Everyone stiffened. Zoe jumped to her feet. Helen placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. Ethan shrank back into his pillows, his wail clutched tighter than ever. Robert rose, his jaw clenched. "Stay with him," he told Helen and Zoe. He strode downstairs, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence. When he opened the door, Detective Harris stood there again, her coat still damp from the morning rain. But this time her expression was different. It carried weight. "Mr. Hartley," she said without preamble, "we need to talk. Last night, Vanessa said something during questioning. Something about your late wife." Robert's stomach dropped. "What about her?" Harris opened her folder, scanning her notes. "Vanessa claimed your wife's death wasn't what it seemed. She hinted there were circumstances you were never told. She didn't give details, but she said if we looked deeper, we'd find something that would shake this family apart." Robert's breath caught. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "That's impossible. My wife died of a sudden heart condition," the doctors said. "Yes," Harris interrupted gently, "but did you ever see the autopsy report yourself? Or did you trust what you were told?" The question sliced through him. He remembered the day of the funeral, the endless stream of condolences, the blur of signatures on documents he had never truly read. He had been too broken to question, too overwhelmed to look for cracks in the story. "I need to know everything," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. Harris nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, keep your son close. If Vanessa knows more, she may try to use it against you." Robert's gaze hardened. "She won't get near him again." When he closed the door, his hands shook. He returned upstairs, his face pale. Helen looked at him anxiously, Zoe clutching Ethan's hand. "What is it?" she asked. Robert hesitated, then answered slowly. "Vanessa said something about Ethan's mother. That her death might not have been what it seemed." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Zoe's eyes widened, her young mind struggling to process the weight of it. Ethan sat up straighter, his small hands moving rapidly. "Mom? What about Mom? She was good. She loved me. She sang to me." Tears filled his eyes as he signed, his little chest heaving. Zoe translated softly, her own throat tight. "He says his mom was good. She loved him. She sang to him. He doesn't believe anything bad." Robert knelt by his son, his heart breaking all over again. "Your mom was good," he said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you different. She loved you more than anything." But even as he said it, a cold doubt twisted inside him. If Vanessa was lying, why target this? Why drag a dead woman into her games? Unless there was truth in it. That night, sleep was impossible. Robert sat in his study long after Helen had taken Zoe to bed and Ethan had finally drifted into restless dreams. The rain had stopped, leaving the estate wrapped in heavy silence. He opened the locked drawer of his desk and pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of his late wife filled the pages. Her smile radiant, her arms always around Ethan. She had been the heart of the family. The thought that her memory might be stained with hidden secrets was unbearable. As Robert stared at the photos, a memory surfaced, one he had buried deep. Weeks before she died, his wife had tried to tell him something. She had sat at this very desk, her hands shaking as she held a letter. He had been too busy that night, distracted with contracts and calls. He had promised to read it later. But later never came. After her death, he had searched the desk and found nothing. The letter had disappeared. A sound jolted him from his thoughts, a soft creak, footsteps in the hall. He rose quickly, heart pounding. When he opened the door, Zoe stood there, her eyes wide and frightened. "Mr. Hartley," she whispered, "I saw someone outside Ethan's window." Robert froze. "What?" Zoe nodded, her voice trembling. "A shadow. Watching." When I moved, it ran. His blood ran cold. He grabbed the nearest lamp, flicking it on, and rushed down the hall to Ethan's room. The boy stirred awake at the sudden light, his eyes wide. He lifted his hands immediately. Someone was there. I felt it. I saw the curtain move. Robert hurried to the window. The glass was smudged, faint fingerprints visible against the pane. Outside, the garden stretched silent, but the hedge along the path was bent, as if someone had brushed past it recently. His chest tightened. Whoever it was had been close, too close. He turned back to Ethan, his voice steady but urgent. You're safe. I won't let anyone take you. He signed the words clumsily, his hands shaky, but Ethan's eyes lit up with recognition. He believed him. Zoe clutched Ethan's hand tightly, her own face pale. Do you think it was her? Vanessa? Robert shook his head. She's in custody. He hesitated, his mind racing. Unless she hadn't acted alone. Unless someone else carried the weight of these buried secrets. That night, no one slept. Helen stayed awake in the hall, a chair pulled close to Ethan's door. Zoe curled on the chair beside Ethan's bed, refusing to leave his side. Robert sat in the study, staring at the shadows outside, waiting for movement. When dawn came, the family gathered at the breakfast table, exhaustion heavy on their faces. Robert picked at his food without eating. Zoe and Ethan whispered in signs across the table, Ethan slowly teaching her new words. For the first time, his hands moved with eagerness instead of fear. Zoe giggled softly when she got a sign wrong, and Ethan corrected her, his eyes brighter. But the peace was broken when the phone rang. Robert answered, his voice rough. It was Detective Harris. Mr. Hartley, she said, her tone grave, I managed to obtain your late wife's autopsy report. You need to see it. His pulse quickened. Tell me. There was a pause on the line, then her voice came steady, heavy. The cause of death listed is not consistent with a natural heart condition. There were traces of something else in her system. Poison. Robert's world tilted. The room spun around him. Zoe looked up from the table, sensing his shock. Ethan froze mid-sign, his eyes locked on his father. Poison. His wife's death hadn't been sudden or natural. Someone had killed her. And if Vanessa had known this all along, then the dark truth wasn't just about cruelty. It was about murder. Robert's grip on the phone tightened. His voice dropped, steel cold. Who? But Detective Harris's voice was grim. We don't know yet. But Vanessa claimed she wasn't the only one keeping the secret. She said the killer is closer than you think. Robert's blood turned to ice. Closer than he thought. Inside the house. Among the staff. Someone he trusted. Ethan's small hands tapped against the table, his eyes wide. Dad? He signed nervously. Zoe watched his trembling fingers, then looked at Robert. He's asking why you look so scared. Robert swallowed, his chest aching. He forced his voice steady. Because, son, the truth about your mom is worse than we thought. And as the words hung in the air, Ethan dropped his wail to the floor, his small body stiff with shock. The mansion felt colder than ever. The silence was heavy, dangerous. And Robert knew, the Real storm had only just begun. Robert Hartley could not move. The word poison echoed in his mind like a hammer striking steel. For years he had lived believing his wife's death was sudden, a cruel twist of nature. But now the ground beneath him shifted with every breath. Someone had killed her. And worse, someone close. Detective Harris's voice on the phone was steady, but Robert barely heard her words. His gaze drifted to Ethan across the breakfast table. The boy was staring at him, his small hands twitching nervously against the tablecloth. Zoe sat beside him, her face pale, her young eyes reading Robert's silence with unease. Helen stood behind them both, her arms folded, her protective stance clear. Mr. Hartley? Detective Harris repeated. Robert's voice cracked. What do I do? Stay calm. I'll bring everything we've gathered to you this afternoon, Harris replied. But listen to me carefully, Vanessa might not have been lying about knowing the truth. And if she knows, then whoever killed your wife might still be close. Until we uncover the full picture, trust no one blindly. Not even those inside your home. Her words cut deep. Robert ended the call and lowered the phone with a trembling hand. Trust no one? The mansion had always been filled with staff. Maids, drivers, guards. He had hired them, trusted them. Had one of them known? Had one of them been part of this? Ethan tapped the table quickly, desperate. His signs came rapid, uneven. What's wrong? Tell me. Please. His eyes brimmed with fear. Zoe leaned in to help him, her small fingers moving gently. He wants to know what's happening. Robert drew a breath and crouched beside his son. He could not give him every detail, not yet, but he could not lie either. His voice was low, careful. We found out your mom didn't just get sick. Someone may have hurt her. Ethan's face paled. His hands lifted, trembling. Hurt? Killed? Zoe's lips parted as she voiced it, the word heavy in the air. Robert's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. Yes. Ethan dropped his wail to the floor, the soft thud breaking the silence. His little hands shook as he signed frantically. Oh, what? She was good. She loved me. She sang to me. Who would hurt her? Zoe caught his signs, tears springing to her eyes as she repeated them aloud. Robert's vision blurred for a moment. He gripped Ethan's small shoulders. I don't know yet, son. But I promise you I will find out. And when I do, I will never let them near you. Ethan stared at him, eyes wet, then nodded faintly as if clinging to his father's vow. But even as Robert said it, fear churned inside him. Because Detective Harris's words echoed louder. Trust no one. The hours crawled. The house felt different now, every shadow suspicious. Helen tried to distract Ethan and Zoe with breakfast, slicing fruit into shapes, but the boy barely touched it. He kept glancing at the curtains, at the doors, as though expecting Vanessa or someone else to burst in. Zoe stayed close, her small hands helping him sign, offering comfort when his fingers shook too much. Robert paced the halls, his mind replaying memories of his late wife. He remembered the last weeks before her death, the tired look in her eyes, the way she sometimes hesitated before speaking, the night she held that missing letter. What had she been trying to tell him? Why hadn't he listened? By noon, the estate was restless. Staff whispered in corners. A gardener claimed he saw someone at the edge of the property fence the night before. The driver swore he heard footsteps by the garage. Fear bled into the walls. Then the doorbell rang again. Robert hurried to the door, bracing himself. Detective Harris stood there, folder in hand, her face grave. Mr. Hartley, she said as he ushered her in. We need to talk privately. Robert shook his head. No secrets. My son deserves to know, even if he can't hear the words. We'll translate for him. Harris studied his face, then nodded. They gathered in the sitting room, Ethan curled on the couch between Zoe and Helen. His small eyes darted between the adults, his fingers ready to ask questions Zoe promised to interpret. Harris opened her folder. The toxicology report showed traces of a rare poison in your wife's system. It wasn't something easily found in common medicine. Whoever administered it knew what they were doing. They wanted it to look natural. Robert's stomach nodded. Harris flipped another page. We also re-examined her medical history. The hospital's notes were inconsistent. It's possible someone inside manipulated the records. Robert rubbed his temples, anger boiling. But who? Who had access? Harris's eyes lifted. That's what we're trying to uncover. Vanessa claims she knows. She said she never poisoned your wife herself, but she overheard someone bragging. According to her, the killer isn't a stranger. It's someone who was already part of your circle. Ethan stiffened. His small hands moved sharply. Circle? Here. In this house. Zoe echoed his fear aloud. Harris nodded. Possibly. Robert stood, pacing. His mind raced through names, the house manager, the cook, even Helen, but his chest rebelled at the thought. Helen had been nothing but loyal. Zoe had saved Ethan. Could Vanessa be lying to drive a wedge? Or had she accidentally revealed a sliver of truth? Harris continued. She gave me one clue before she shut down. She said the killer had a reason to silence your wife. Something about an inheritance, money tied to Ethan's future. That's all she would say. Robert froze. His late wife had indeed set up a trust fund for Ethan, one with strict conditions. If she had tried to protect that money from greedy hands, it could have painted a target on her back. Ethan's hands moved quickly again. Mom died because of me? His eyes shone with horror. Zoe quickly caught his signs, her voice breaking as she translated. Robert rushed to him, grabbing his small hands firmly. No, son. This is not your fault. Don't you ever think that. He clumsily tried to sign the words himself, his fingers shaky but desperate. Not your fault. Never. Ethan's tears spilled, but he leaned into his father's embrace, clinging to the truth. The detective closed her folder. We'll need to reopen every record, interview every staff member, dig into finances. Until then, I suggest you keep Ethan watched at all times. If Vanessa knew this much, she might not be the only one willing to use it. Robert nodded, his mind a storm. He looked at Zoe and Helen. No one leaves his side. Not for a second. That night, tension crackled in the air like static. Ethan refused to sleep alone, his wail clutched tight. Zoe stayed by his side, whispering soft words and signing silly jokes to make him smile. For a few moments he giggled, the sound rare and sweet, before fear crept back into his eyes. Robert sat by the window in Ethan's room, staring out into the night. He thought of his late wife's voice, the softness of it, and how she had tried to warn him. He thought of Vanessa in her cell, smiling with secrets. And he thought of the staff moving through the halls, each one a potential betrayer. Then, near midnight, a sound shattered the silence, a faint clatter from the kitchen. Helen, dozing in the hall, snapped awake. Robert motioned for her to stay with the children and hurried downstairs, his chest tight. The kitchen was dark, shadows stretching long across the tiles. He flipped on the light. The back door was ajar. A cold breeze swept in, rattling the pans. Robert's pulse spiked. He stepped closer, noticing something on the counter, a folded piece of paper. His hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was familiar, his late wife's. The letter. His eyes scanned the trembling words. If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. Trust no one. Protect Ethan. The one you think you know best is the one who will betray you. Robert staggered back, his breath catching. His wife had known. She had written the truth. But how had the letter resurfaced now, years later? Who had placed it here tonight? Behind him, the floor creaked. He spun around, but the hall was empty. He clutched the letter, his heart racing. Upstairs, Ethan stirred, jolted awake as if he felt the danger ripple through the house. His hands moved fast in the dark. Danger. Close. Zoe, watching him, gasped and whispered, "He says danger is here." And in that moment, Robert knew, the killer wasn't just in the past. The killer was near, watching, moving in the shadows of the mansion. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was walking the halls. The folded letter in Robert's trembling hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His late wife's words bled into his chest like fire. If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. Trust no one. Protect Ethan. The one you think you know best is the one who will betray you. His heart thundered as he stared around the silent kitchen, every shadow alive with menace. Whoever had slipped this letter back into the house was close. Too close. He shoved the letter into his pocket and bolted upstairs, his polished shoes pounding the wooden steps. In Ethan's room, the boy sat up in bed, his wail clenched tightly, eyes wide with terror. His small hands moved rapidly, shaky but urgent. I felt it. Someone is here. Don't let them take me. Zoe, sitting on the chair beside him, caught the signs and shouted, her voice cracking. He says someone's here. Right now. Helen stood in the doorway, her face pale, clutching her daughter's shoulder as if shielding her from an invisible storm. Robert closed the door behind him, locking it. His breathing came fast. We're not safe, he whispered, though the words were more for himself than the others. He pulled out the letter and unfolded it, showing it to Helen. Her hands shook as she read the scrawled handwriting. She knew, Helen whispered. Your wife knew someone wanted her dead. Ethan tugged at Zoe's sleeve, demanding to know what the adults were saying. She signed quickly, her fingers trembling. Your mom knew. She tried to warn. She said protect you. Ethan's lips parted in shock, his eyes swimming with tears. His hands lifted weakly. She loved me. She tried to save me. Zoe nodded fiercely, signing back. Yes. She loved you more than anything. She tried. Ethan buried his face in his wail, silent sobs shaking his small shoulders. Robert knelt beside the bed, gripping his son's tiny hands. We'll find out who did this. I swear to you. He tried to sign the words, clumsy but desperate. Find truth. Protect you. Ethan's tears slowed just enough for him to nod. The boy believed him. He needed to believe him. Before the night could deepen, heavy knocks rattled the front door downstairs. Robert jumped to his feet, his pulse surging. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Zoe held Ethan tighter. Who is that? She whispered. Robert didn't answer. He unlocked the bedroom door and hurried down the stairs, each knock louder, angrier, more impatient. When he opened the door, Detective Harris stood there, but she wasn't alone. Two uniformed officers flanked her, their expressions grim. Harris's voice was low, serious. Mr. Hartley, we need to come in. We have new information. Robert let them in, his chest tightening. Harris didn't waste time. Vanessa confessed more during interrogation, she said, pulling a file from her coat. She admitted she didn't poison your wife herself, but she knew who did. And she said you'd never believe it unless you saw the proof. Robert's throat closed. Who? He demanded. Harris's eyes met his, steady and heavy. Your wife's death was arranged by someone inside your household. Someone who had daily access. Someone she trusted enough to let near her food and medicine. Mr. Hartley, she paused. It was Helen. The room collapsed into silence. Robert's jaw dropped, his head whipping toward the stairs where Helen stood, Zoe by her side, Ethan clinging to her skirt. Helen's face went white as chalk. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. That's not true. I would never. But Harris cut her off, laying photos and documents on the coffee table. Financial records. Months before your wife's death, Helen received unexplained deposits into her account. They stopped immediately after. Witnesses remember she was the one who prepared meals in those weeks. Vanessa said she overheard her boasting to someone on the phone, saying once the wife was gone, everything in this house would change. Robert staggered back, his chest burning. His voice cracked. Helen? No. She's been with us for years. She cared for Ethan, she loves him. Ethan's head whipped between them, his little hands flying, panicked. Not her. Not Helen. She's safe. She's my friend. She wouldn't. Zoe caught the signs, shouting. He says she wouldn't. He trusts her. Helen's tears streamed down her cheeks. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. Sir, I swear to you, I never touched your wife. Those deposits weren't bribes. They were repayments from my brother. He used my account. Please, you have to believe me. Please. She turned to Ethan, who was trembling in Zoe's arms. Ethan, you know me. I would never hurt your mom. Never. The boy's hands moved slowly, trembling. Safe? Zoe hesitated, then whispered, He's asking if you're safe. Helen dropped to her knees, crying openly. Yes, Ethan. You are safe with me. Always. Ethan's small eyes filled with tears. He ran into her arms, clutching her neck, sobbing silently. Zoe's voice cracked as she translated. He says he believes you. Detective Harris crossed her arms, unmoved. Belief doesn't erase evidence. Until we verify her claims, Helen will need to come with us for questioning. Officer stepped forward. Helen gasped, clutching Ethan tighter. The boy's body went stiff. His hands flailed wildly, frantic. Don't take her. Don't. She's not bad. Zoe's voice rose with desperation as she translated. He says don't take her. He says she's not bad. Robert's face broke. He looked at his son, then at Helen, then at Harris. His voice was raw. Please, let me talk to her alone for a moment. Please. Harris hesitated, then nodded. The officer stepped back. In the silence, Robert faced Helen. If you know something, if Vanessa is twisting the truth, tell me now. Helen sobbed. Sir, I swear on everything I never harmed your wife. But I know something. Something I was too afraid to say. She glanced at Zoe and Ethan, then lowered her voice. It wasn't me. It was Vanessa. She was having an affair with the family doctor. They wanted your wife gone because she suspected them. Vanessa bribed me to keep quiet, to say nothing when your wife fell ill. The deposits, they weren't bribes for murder. They were hush money. I didn't use it. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to think I betrayed you. But I never poisoned her. Never. Robert's chest heaved, his mind spinning. Could this be true? Vanessa had been cunning, manipulative, capable of cruelty beyond measure. And an affair with the doctor? Fit. The doctor had been the one to pronounce the death. The doctor had handled the reports. He looked at Harris, his voice sharp. Check the doctor. Check his finances. His calls. Everything. Harris's eyes narrowed, then she nodded. We'll follow that lead. She motioned to the officers, who reluctantly stepped back. Helen collapsed in relief, holding Ethan as he clung to her neck. Hours later, after frantic calls and checks, the truth broke wide open. Detective Harris returned that evening, her face grave but victorious. You were right, she told Robert. The doctor colluded with Vanessa. Bank records show large transfers to him from Vanessa's private accounts. He altered the autopsy, covered the poison, and kept her secret. Helen's accounts show deposits from Vanessa too, but she never spent the money. She told the truth. She stayed silent out of fear. Robert's legs nearly gave out. The truth hit like a tidal wave. Vanessa, the woman he had brought into his house, had murdered his wife with help from a man they trusted. And all along, Ethan had lived in silence, abused and afraid, carrying the weight of secrets he didn't even understand. The police moved swiftly. Vanessa, already in custody, now faced charges of conspiracy to murder. The doctor was arrested before midnight. And Helen was cleared, though the shame of silence still weighed heavily on her shoulders. Robert looked at her, his voice quiet. "You should have told me sooner." Helen lowered her eyes. "I know. I thought silence was safer." But silence only hurt him more. She glanced at Ethan, whose small hands clutched Zoe's tightly. The boy lifted his head, his hands moving with newfound strength. "She's gone now? She can't hurt me?" Zoe's fingers echoed his signs. Robert knelt in front of him, tears streaming freely. "She's gone, son. Forever. She'll never hurt you again. And I promise, I'll never let anyone silence you again." Ethan's hands moved slowly, deliberately, spelling each letter with care. "Love me?" Robert's heart cracked wide open. He grabbed his son, pulling him close. "I love you. More than anything. Always." His hands fumbled to repeat the words in sign, clumsy but desperate. "Love. Always." Ethan's tears flowed, but for the first time they weren't from fear. He buried his face in his father's chest, Whale squeezed between them, holding on like the world had finally shifted in his favor. Zoe smiled through her tears. She signed across to Ethan. "See? You're not alone anymore." He looked at her, his small lips curving in the faintest smile. He signed back, "Friend. Always." Helen stood behind them, her hand pressed to her mouth, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Robert rose, holding Ethan in his arms. The boy was light, fragile, but in that moment he felt heavier with the weight of truth finally spoken. The mansion no longer felt like a prison of secrets. It felt like a place where they could start again. Weeks later, the estate was quieter. Curtains were drawn open, letting in sunlight. Laughter returned in small bursts, Ethan giggling as Zoe practiced clumsy signs, Robert fumbling but improving each day. Helen worked with renewed strength, no longer bowed by silence. Detective Harris visited once, smiling faintly as she saw Ethan teaching his father the sign for hope. And though scars remained, one lesson blazed clear: silence kills but truth saves. In the shadows of wealth, a deaf boy's tears had revealed a crime no one wanted to see. But when someone finally listened, the house of lies crumbled. And from its ruins, love, raw, imperfect but true, finally grew.